Phone rang. Hello. Is that Barrow? Yeah. This is Ralph Usherwood. Oh, I'm art editor of Radio Times. And I've seen your work and I like it. Will you come and do me a drawing for next Monday? Just like that. Fantastic. Oh, yes, certainly.
For a music program, for a religious program,
A religious
for what?
music program, a devotional music program, including singing, Ash told me. But I'll leave the rest to you.
The artist Val Biro, originally from Hungary, is still busy at work in his studio in a rural Sussex village at the age of 92. His graceful Baroque drawings were a distinctive feature of Radio Times throughout the 1950s and 60s, starting in 1951.
A tiny drawing, it'll be 3/4 inch deep and 2 1/4 wide.
An angel, a cherub. Oh, you've still got it.
And that's my very first historic drawing for Radio Times. He said, you must be careful, no roughs, no time. It's got to be good, otherwise I can't use it. And if I can't use it, it'll be an empty space in Radio Times. We can't risk that. So I knew I had to put my skates on. And it worked.
Radio Times was born in the Jazz Age, 90 years ago this week, when the BBC London station was still known as 2LO.
This is London calling, as the Radio Times has now made its appearance and will give you full particulars of the week's programmes in advance. This will be the last of my Saturday night talks on coming events from 2LO.
The newspapers had wanted to charge the fledgling BBC, then the British Broadcasting Company, for listing its radio programmes. In response, the directors decided that the BBC needed its own print magazine to address the public. The general manager, John Reith, got to work, and Radio Times was the result. It was produced in partnership with the publisher George Newnes. Their man Leonard Crocombe, editor of the wildly successful Titbits, was seconded to be first editor of Radio Times. It was, as the cover page proudly announced, the official organ of the BBC. And quite soon, its pages became adorned with the work of the country's outstanding graphic artists, eminent craftspeople such as the late Eric Fraser.
The British Broadcasting Company. Managing Director, Mr. J.C.W. Reith.
The Radio Times, in its early days, was essentially a magazine for entertainment. And for quite some time, most of my drawings were on the humorous side. My first drawing for the Radio Times appeared in 1926. My drawings then were quite light-hearted and often about broadcasting itself.
Those were indeed pioneer days. Look here, my diary says, review, complete with dancing girls, tap dancing in the studio.
See, look at the line on that. It's wonderful.
That's Eric Fraser,
yeah,
yes.
And the play of black and white against a fine line.
Out in the country, in Caversham, near Reading, this is the place where the written archives of the BBC are stored, and it is a treasure house of the art of Radio Times. A lot of other things here, of course, too, but it's the artwork that's so particularly striking today. On a round table here, and with me is...
Brian Thomas, a retired Radio Times employee.
Yeah, you were art editor?
For 10 years, yes.
Is that... Eric? That's Eric Fraser as well, yes. You don't recognise him when he does modern things.
There is a great variety in the work that I've done over the years. It's gone from designs for postage stamps to 60-foot murals.
When I had the opportunity to go through this collection and look at Eric Fraser's work en masse, you know, the grand old man of illustration, black, sombre, difficult, started off as a light-hearted illustrator, you know, amusement and fun.
Somebody must have given him a Greek play to illustrate.
Somebody cast him into a role that he obviously found satisfying, and after that your typecast became the norm.
And not only typecast for that kind of illustration, but also he almost became the Radio Times illustrator, didn't he? He became the one that everybody else aspired to have the impact of, if not the same style.
I was so pleased that we were able to commission him to do the Lord of the Rings cover, the last but one illustration he did for Radio Times, you know.
Even from the searching eye of Sauron, the Lord of the Rings.
What a brilliant artist he was.
The artist Val Biro in his Sussex studio.
He, along with John Reith and along with Eric Gill, the sculptor, created the Radio Times aesthetic. What Radio Times should look like. In other words, meticulous, professional, serious, educational. These are all Arethian ideas. And they were the visual aesthetic of the Radio Times for the next 20 or 30 years.
So there we have it.
Now,
That's 1932.
This is a person in the grave with a mother, a picture of a mother. I've come to a place in Art Gallery Land, St James's, where for the last 35 years, Chris Beatles has kind of been creating a market for illustration. And one of the people on his walls is Eric Fraser.
He lies between the 19th and the 20th century black and white tradition in a way that almost nobody else does. So he is strong on design, faultless draftsmanship, imaginative use of the line.
3 guineas, I think, was the price for quite a long time in the Radio Times days for a piece of artwork. What's the price of an Eric Fraser now?
Well, they're still very good value. They're somewhere between 500 and 2,000. And that's about by 5 by 7, something that took him 3 days. But three guineas in the 20s, he started in 1926, would have not been too bad.
In those days, I had an easy technique of plain line and solid black, which saved an awful lot of time.
And somehow, even though he uses so many different techniques from clumping and flowing lines and hatching, cross-hatching to make it even look like a woodcut, though he didn't do woodcuts, he ends up looking like an Eric Fraser because he manages to combine all these essential elements of a great illustration.
Artists were commissioned on the basis of having a deep appreciation and understanding of literary material.
David Driver knows the rigours of the Radio Times commissioning process intimately. He was art editor and deputy editor in the 70s and 80s.
Cared about broadcast plays, cared about documentaries. They had integrity, they really did, but they didn't want to spoil your own personal imaginings of that sound material.
Right at the beginning, though, there was this body of talent to draw on. There were a lot of very talented artists coming out of art school and college, weren't there?
They were all classically trained. People read and cared about reading, and they recognised the relevance of that content. Robin Jakes, Eric Fraser, Val Biro, Victor Reingenum, Leonard Rosamond.
And then they read the scripts, didn't they?
They did. They would have the scripts midweek, the week before the paper came out, and they would absorb those scripts and be very attentive to every aspect of the production.
The Squirrel's Cage.
A radio play by Tyrone Guthrie with Richard Williams, Geoffrey
If it were a play I was doing, I would treat it in a somewhat more realistic way.
I said it's cold.
Yes. Why don't you put on some more coal?
The speed with which a drawing has to be done really means that if one gets the script or the briefing on a Friday evening, it's necessary to get down straight away to a pencil sketch to get some idea of what one has to do.
This is a rather special box full of folders. A treasure trove in Sussex. I just pull one out at random. Val Biro has managed to retrieve many of his illustrations from the commissioning machine at Radio Times. Yeah, there's one. Oh.
Well, this would be a decorative.
This is decoration one.
It says decorations, which is how I really started with Radio Times. This kind of
That's a coloured one.
That's a coloured one, yes.
Yeah.
That would be a Christmas edition.
On Saturday, one's concerned with drawing it out, and on Sunday, with finishing it.
Like that. That would be across the top of a page or the bottom of a page.
That's right, the top of a page, and then the type nestling underneath it. Looking really quite elegant.
My first drawing for Radio Times was a single-column illustration. As far as I remember, it was for an oratorio of Handel in Radio 3, Athalia or Atalia.
Peter Brooks is now notorious and celebrated as the stinging political cartoonist for the Times. But as a young illustrator at the end of the 1960s, he was snapped up by art editor David Driver for Radio Times.
It was a bearded gentleman in a turban, and the folds of the turban made up a child, baby. But it sort of points out to me how the thinking was always something hidden in something, or something that becomes something else. In other words, sort of graphic ideas which don't have anything to do really with straight drawing.
Anyway, you got this commission on a Friday?
I got the commission probably on the Friday, and it was a tiny drawing, but you panic in a way that you wouldn't believe for about a 3 centimetre wide drawing, whatever it is.
Delivered on Monday morning?
Delivered on probably Tuesday morning.
I think the challenge of having to produce a drawing in a short time does make one draw on hidden reserves of energy. I suppose we all have these hidden reserves which are there to call upon in emergency. And as far as I'm concerned, every commission I receive from the Radio Times is an emergency.
In front of us on the round table, some rather wonderful, rather memorable stuff, including that famous laughing cat. Radio Times covers, many now treasured in the archives at Caversham, were a famous national showcase for illustrators, particularly the noted special editions. Former art editor Brian Thomas again.
Yes, this dramatically increased the sale of that particular issue. So you can see that in those days Radio Times could do a humour number, a Whitsun holiday number, so not a specific programme, but promoting an issue.
This compelling image of the cat by Gilroy. This is 1936, I think.
That's right.
And what, 3 or 4 million copies of this would be printed. They'd be on every bookstall in the country in great piles. So this image would leap out at you all over the place in mid-30s Britain.
Very often the accusation these days is that all magazines look the same. But this, of course, on a newsstand would absolutely stand out as being singular and different to everybody else.
It's the most wonderful, slightly sinister cat, isn't he, though he's laughing?
Yes, those fang-like teeth at the bottom there. But this is the one that drew the most reader response. People stuck it on a cover or something, and they would send it to their neighbour, and each year they'd send it backwards and forwards. They enjoyed it so much, it was like telling the familiar joke.
And it was merely an example of the weight that Radio Times put on illustration. Throughout the magazine, there were all these pictures. There, for example, Bob Sherry's caricatures, which are stupendous line work, aren't they?
Yes, and he's thoughtfully included the names of the originals underneath, but a wonderfully fluid line to his work. And the great thing about this, of course, is that it would be commissioned, as we discussed, on a Thursday, to be back in on the Monday. And that was it. Unless there was something absolutely disastrous, you had to accept it.
And you wanted a sheriff's effect. You had a page of greyness on the programme pages. You wanted a sheriff's caricature to lift the page.
Hello, me ducks. Here I'm again with me old string bag. Handy things, string bags, ain't they? I lost 2 pounds of beans last week.
Santos Casani, the famous teacher of dancing.
This new dance being introduced to this country consists of different variations taken from the blues, tango, jazz.
London calling. We are now taking you over to the Savoy Hotel for dance music by the Savoy Orpheums and Havana bands until midnight.
This is really fascinating because 90th anniversary of Radio Times, go back 80 years and here's the 10th anniversary number cover of the Radio Times 2D, tuppence, 1933.
The Daily Times and Big Ben chimes are Radio Times.
And it's very modernist sort of cover, this, because it's got a sort of printing press on it.
Yes, this had marked the transition to Waterloo and Sons, who created this factory especially for Radio Times.
Park Royal.
Park Royal. And as the circulation it kept on increasing, they built again another factory mimicking it entirely up in East Kilbride.
So a whole printing press and a factory surrounding it based on Radio Times.
Several printing presses. This one printing press wouldn't handle this.
And this celebrating it. And with the advent of the war, it was thought that Radio Times was an important national comment, so that it should be kept going. So the staff were sent to outlying parts. East Kilbride had a complete suite of editorial offices so that staff could be moved up there en masse of a sudden, and it still kept being produced. There was the technical thing, of course, that the reproduction was pretty crummy. Put a photograph, a black and white photograph into those programme pages.
Right.
That, particularly Eric Fraser graphic style, just leapt out of the
that's
page.
Right. And there was something about the letterpress process which gave drawings crispness and, as you say, an ability to stand out, which photographs and anything that wasn't in line didn't have. And there were others who pursued that same sort of ability to stand out as well. I mean, people with a more, if you like, sometimes more delicate approach, like Robin Jakes, still had this wonderful flair for having an engraving type style.
And of course, dear old Robin Jakes, he was the most decorative of all of us, wasn't he?
The whole surface was decorative.
The whole surface, like it smelt of roses, didn't it, really? With little dots of ink, very meticulously done. And he was a very elegant, soft-spoken man. He looked like his paintings, his drawings, you know. He was ethereal. He was aesthetic. He was an aesthete. He was slightly effeminate, but he wasn't effeminate. And you just expected him to do pointillist work with the tip of his pen, you know, which he did.
And of course he got the historical plays, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
So glance at the page, you knew there was somewhere happening in the Home Service or Radio 4 or whatever it had become by then. That sort of play was happening that day. And you couldn't have too much of him. You needed these styles to suggest all these different sorts of radio that were going on under the BBC umbrella.
That's right, I mean, broadcasting was a very sort of modern medium. I mean, today, sound broadcasting is an old-fashioned medium, isn't it? But then it was exciting and up to the minute. So that influenced us, really.
It is in the daily business of broadcasting that wireless still holds the imagination of the world.
The aerial towers of what was then the greatest broadcasting station in the world were etched in black against the starry sky. One felt the mystery of those invisible waves, the miracle of those hidden voices sweeping out through the night.
Daventry calling, Daventry calling, Daventry calling, dark and still.
People were fascinated with broadcasting and wanted to see how this miracle was brought to their rooms, how it was captured. And they were not the television audiences of today where you'd be invited along to a show. This is the only way they'd have to see how it came down the wires to their radios.
But you had the Eric Fraser traditionalists, you had Robin Jakes, who could have been doing it in the 18th century as far as many people knew. And then you had these sort of masts and looks like mobile phone masts there from artists who are really responding to the modernness of the medium.
Well, you've got to remember they filmed Things to Come.
And the pulsing aerials sending out the signal and things like that.
Where this sort of imagery was very much part of the furniture.
But things were to come for the BBC and for Radio Times at the end of the 1960s. As shadow art editor, David Driver planned some big changes in secret.
Television had come into the pages. There had been a sort of difficulty for people on the paper to embrace television because they were so used to radio. And it was actually chaotic. And that was obviously felt by the management of the BBC.
After all these years of being so sure and safe in the radio world, television was causing trouble at the BBC anyway.
And so we produced a carefully worked out printed dummy, which was done under secret scenario there.
Did Radio Times know about this?
I don't think the staff on Radio Times knew about it. No.
Because it was fairly radical, particularly that RT.
Yes, indeed. I introduced certain new fonts and it was ratified, and out of that came Geoffrey Cannon's appointment as editor, and he requested I come in as art editor.
And you were using people new to Radio Times. You had a new portfolio of artists, didn't you?
I added to the portfolio of existing artists, and some didn't continue from the original sort of ones I inherited.
Such as Val Biro in Sussex.
And along comes an appropriately named director called Geoffrey Cannon. And what did Geoffrey Cannon do? He fired me.
formally told you?
Well, he just didn't come back to me. He didn't commission me. Why? Because he wanted to be a new broom. Everything had to be modernized. All this Usherwood stuff is all old-fashioned. Let's go modern. And he did. And he ruined the Radio Times, to my mind. Absolutely ruined it.
What did you feel about that, personally?
I was bitter, quite rightly. But I knew that this is time marching on, if you like.
I brought in, I met as a student, Peter Brooks.
Very much a man of ideas, not just illustrating, was he?
No, and actually that's another element that was very important with the commissioning, that because of the nature of the newer artists, a lot of them anyway, wanted to make a point as well as this being a narrative. There was always, very often, Peter Brooks is a good example, there would be a sort of an amusing element to them, a side element to them, which actually just added a piquance, I think, to the content.
I did a cover about, I think it was the 40th anniversary of Hiroshima, which was a terribly difficult one to do, but it still gave me material to think on. The Hiroshima idea was a hokusai depiction of the wave coming over and engulfing a bird, presumably the dove of peace, and it sounds desperately corny now, but I think that's what it was.
Yeah, again, this was an idea thought out in graphic art terms, the wave, one of the most famous images of all wood engraving.
That's right. I mean, one of the, if you like, techniques one uses in the world I inhabit is parody of existing images which are familiar to people and you can give a twist on.
And another sort of very modern person you used, Nigel Holmes.
Yes, the Nigel Holmes, Peter Brooks, behind-the-scenes drawings. I met Nigel when he was a student at Royal College, and we became very, very close friends. And we did these information graphics in Radio Times, how something works, and he would go and see all the important people. In fact, it was like making a program.
Rang up the astronauts for one of the space trips.
The Soyuz Apollo, when the Americans and Russians linked up.
All right, on a show. What provide you look for? Okay, I'm opening hatch 3. Hello.
I think it was called Handshake in Space, where the Soyuz and the Americans met up in space, and they had this symbolic, which was a huge moment, a wonderful moment. Not as big as landing on the moon, but pretty big, and politically it had a great impact as well.
In the name of the Soviet people and from myself personally, I am congratulating you with a significant event, the first docking of the Soviet spacecraft Soyuz 19 and the American spacecraft Apollo.
One of David Driver's most striking recruits for Radio Times in the 1970s was the veteran boys' adventure illustrator, Frank Bellamy, famous for his strips in The Eagle. This is Frank Bellamy. There's a Dalek, of course. There's a Dalek, of course, there. And Doctor Who. And the Dalek is saying, "You are the Doctor, you are the enemy of the Daleks, you will be exterminated." But that's just what is happening there. It's all wonderfully laid out, with jagged lines becoming blood, and one of those sucker sticks that the Daleks have in front of them actually coming out of the page, and this is quite a work of art, this.
Indeed. And that was a skill I think Frank had, apart from his meticulous attention to research, making sure everything's correct, if uniforms are relevant, he will get everything right. And that also is overall a job, a very important job for an illustrator.
And it was Radio Times' use of these drawings that made us, illustrators, respectable.
Over the decades, illustrators such as Frank Bellamy, Eric Fraser, Peter Brooks, Robin Jakes and Val Beera himself.
Slowly but surely, until we came up the social level to other artists. And we are now taken very seriously. Look at Chris Beatles, the exhibition in London, who specializes on the art of the illustrator. And our work, through him and other people like him, is respected.
It was very interesting, this major show that we just put on, where we had thousands of people come through. And I must have had 30, 40 spontaneous conversations of people of varying ages who had scrapbooks cut out from the Radio Times of all the Eric Frasers. It was just part of their life. And that leads on very easily at a wider level to the fact that Radio Times is just part of the nation's cultural memory. And part of that is the look of Eric Fraser.
In the case of a musical item, then it seems to call for an essentially decorative treatment, because most musical instruments are in themselves decorative. What I most enjoy drawing is the human form, because it can be manipulated more easily to fit into a composition.
So, as Radio Times celebrates its 90th birthday this month, is the artistic legacy still alive, or is it now just heritage and archive material? A question for the current editor, Ben Preston.
I think the artwork is still very much part of our DNA. I was looking back over some covers because we've been choosing covers for our exhibition at the Museum of London to celebrate the 90th. And you look at some of the recent covers, we've had David Hockney on the front. We've had Sir Peter Blake, who actually, we commissioned him to do a portrait for the Queen's Jubilee last year. And if you look at our radio pages still have nice little illustrations in them. If you look at what we do at Christmas and Easter, on the public holidays and the feast days, we still have specially hand-drawn, crafted edges for the pages. And the readers love that, and they recognise the continuity of it.
So maybe there's an element of nostalgia about illustration.
I think we're tipping our hat to that every Christmas, because at Christmas you're not pushing a particular programme, you're trying to capture a feeling. And people are sentimental about Christmas, they are nostalgic about Christmas.
Can you still be subtle now? Or do you have to be more in your face because that's the way photographic realism takes you?
I think it's also the reality of the newsstand. Now we have to stand against 500 magazines all screaming ever louder and larger for attention, and we try to keep a Radio Times look, but obviously the context has changed.
Olden days had different ways, their pleasures then were fewer. Modern days will...
It saddens me to look at Radio Times today, I'm afraid. It looks like any other rather cheap weekly magazine, doesn't it, really?
The Daily Times, that Big Ben chimes, are Radio Times.
Okay. This is rather fun. Look, it's a music hall. There must be a broadcast about the music hall. So that would be the top of the column, and that's the bottom of the column. And the fragment in here.
In my day of working for it, it seemed to me that there was nothing else like it. That's not to say that the Friday to Monday/Tuesday thing wasn't full of tension and, God, what am I going to do for this? Am I going to do it in time? And that's a different thing. But the joy of working for Radio Times, I tell you, was absolute. And it was in everyone's homes. I mean, that was a treat and a half, you know?
The Art of Radio Times was presented by Peter Day and produced by Simon Elms.